8 months. That was how long the Galactic Alliance had been losing. Not skirmishing. Not taking hits and recovering. Losing, the slow grinding kind that didn't announce itself all at once but showed up every morning in the reports, in the numbers, in the maps where the defended line kept moving in the wrong direction no matter what anyone did to stop it. Commander Reth had been staring at those maps for most of those 8 months. He knew every system on them by heart now. Knew which ones had fallen, which ones were holding by a thread, which ones were going to be on the wrong side of the line within the next 30 days if something didn't change. He had spent his career preparing for threats, running scenarios, building contingencies. He had been considered, by most people who worked with him, to be about as thoroughly prepared as a military commander could reasonably be. The Vorn had made that feel like a joke. Nobody had fully understood what the Vorn were before the first contact. The early reports described them as insect-like, which was accurate in a basic physical sense but missed everything that actually mattered. They were not like insects in the way that word suggested. Small, reactive, driven by simple instinct. They were organized in a way that was almost architectural. Every unit in a Vorn force operated as part of a single coordinated structure. No gaps, no hesitation, no unit acting independently of the whole. They didn't have a command structure the way Alliance forces did, no central point you could target to create confusion. The whole thing was the command structure. All of it at once. And they did not stop. That was the thing Reth kept coming back to. Every military force he had ever studied, every conflict in Alliance history, had moments of pause built into it. Moments where the advancing side consolidated, resupplied, assessed. Natural breaks in the pressure. The Vorn didn't have those. They moved and kept moving, and when they hit resistance they absorbed the cost of breaking through it and kept moving anyway, and the math of that, the simple relentless math of a force that did not stop, had been grinding the Alliance backward for 8 months without pause. 3 systems were gone. 3 systems that had taken decades to settle and develop and connect into the wider fabric of Alliance civilization. Gone in 8 months. The people evacuated, the infrastructure abandoned, the space itself ceded to a species that communicated exclusively through the fact of its advance. The 4th system, Kelvari, was 40 days out at the Vorn's current pace. Maybe less. Reth had tried everything that existed in the Alliance's collective military knowledge. Fortified defensive lines, the Vorn hit them until they broke and kept going. Flanking operations. The Vorn's distributed structure meant there was no flank in any meaningful sense. You hit the edge and the edge responded the same way the center did. Targeted strikes on what Alliance intelligence believed were Vorn supply lines. The Vorn either didn't have supply lines the way Alliance forces understood them or had them spread so widely that removing pieces didn't affect the whole. He had called in every favor, activated every reserve, requisitioned every vessel that could be spared from every member civilization with anything to spare. The line had held a little longer each time, and then stopped holding. 40 days. Maybe less. Reth sat in the command room of his flagship and looked at the map and thought about what options were left. The list was short. It had been getting shorter for 8 months. He went through it one more time the way he always did, methodically, making sure he hadn't missed anything, making sure there wasn't some angle he had failed to consider. There wasn't. He pulled up the Alliance member registry. Went through it. Most had already contributed what they had. Some were holding reserves back for their own defense, which Reth couldn't blame them for. The math was simple and everyone could see it. If Kelvari fell, the Vorn would have a staging position that changed the geometry of the whole conflict. After Kelvari, the pace wouldn't be 40 days per system. It would be faster. He scrolled through the registry slowly. His cursor stopped on Earth. Earth was the quiet member. That was how everyone in the Alliance thought of them, in the comfortable shorthand that organizations develop for their members. The Vareth were the diplomats. The Sorvari were the engineers. The Daven were the traders. And Earth was the quiet one. Reliable. Solid. Present at every meeting, signed up to every agreement, never causing problems. They had a decent fleet by Alliance standards. A capable ground force. Nothing that had ever made anyone sit up straighter in a room. They had joined the Alliance 60 years ago and in 60 years had never started a conflict, never escalated a dispute, never done anything that drew particular attention in any direction. They were simply there. A steady, unremarkable presence that everyone was comfortable not thinking about too hard. Reth had not called on them yet because he had not thought it would make a significant difference. Whatever Earth could spare would be useful but not decisive. That was his honest assessment. He looked at the map. At Kelvari. At the 40 days he might or might not have. He decided that not decisive was better than nothing, and nothing was what he currently had. He drafted the transmission himself. Kept it short because the situation was past the point where long messages served any purpose. He stated the facts: the Vorn advance, the 4 systems, the timeline, the current state of Alliance resources. Then he made the request. Send whatever you can spare. He sent it and sat back and looked at the map and waited. He expected a response within a day or two. A fleet number. A deployment timeline. Something measured and practical that he could work into his remaining options. Earth's response came back in 40 minutes. Reth read it. Read it again. 12 words and a set of coordinates. He sat with that for a moment. Then he called his navigation officer and told him to clear the coordinates. Something told him, in the quiet way that certain things made themselves known before you understood why, that what he had just set in motion was not going to look like anything he had planned for. He was right. 40 minutes. Reth had been in military command long enough to know what response time said about the person on the other end. A fast response meant one of two things. Either the situation was simple enough that no deliberation was needed, or the answer had already been prepared before the question arrived. The first option would have been insulting given what he had just described. Which left the second. Earth had been ready before he asked. He read the message again. 12 words. Not a single one wasted. No formal acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. No expression of Alliance solidarity. No carefully worded commitment to shared defense. Just, understood. Units already en route. Please clear the following coordinates. Units. Not ships. Not forces. Not fleet elements or ground divisions or any of the standard military language that every Alliance member used when describing what they were sending somewhere. Units. A word so plain it told him almost nothing, which he was beginning to think might be deliberate. He looked at the coordinates. A point in space approximately 6 hours from the current Vorn front line at standard jump travel. Clear open space. Nothing there currently. Nothing nearby that would explain the choice of location strategically. Just a specific point in empty space that Earth wanted everyone moved away from. Reth passed the coordinates to his navigation officer without comment. Clear the area. 2-kilometer buffer minimum. The officer looked at the coordinates. Then at Reth. What are we clearing it for, sir? I don't know yet, Reth said. Move everyone back anyway. Colonel Rick Dale signed the deployment order at 0340 Earth Standard Time. He had been at Earth Command's Deep Operations Center for 6 hours before Reth's transmission arrived, which was not a coincidence. Earth's long-range monitoring network had been tracking the Vorn advance for 5 months. The internal assessments had been updated weekly. The trajectory was not complicated to read: 3 systems, a 4th in the timeline, an alliance that was running out of runway. Rick had been watching that picture develop the same way you watched a storm system build on a weather map. Calmly, carefully, knowing roughly when it was going to arrive and making sure the preparations were complete before it did. When Reth's message came in, Rick read it once. Then he picked up his authorization card, held it to the reader, and signed the order that had been sitting in the deployment queue for 11 days already. He didn't make a speech about it. Didn't brief anyone beyond the 2 officers who needed to know the operational details. Didn't file a formal notification with the Alliance Council because the deployment would be visible before any notification arrived anyway, and words were less useful than facts in situations like this one. He sent 12 words back to Commander Reth. Then he went and got a coffee and watched the clock. The 6 hours that followed were the longest of Reth's recent memory. He kept his command crew occupied with legitimate work, status updates from the front, resource allocation reviews, communication checks with the system still under Alliance control. Normal operational rhythm. He didn't tell them what he was waiting for because he didn't have anything useful to tell them. Earth was sending units. Units were en route. Beyond that, he knew exactly as much as everyone else in the room, which was nothing. His senior officer, a steady and experienced woman who had been with him for 4 years and had the useful quality of asking direct questions when she thought they needed asking, came to stand beside him at the 40-minute mark. What did Earth say they were sending? She asked. Units, Reth said. She waited for more. More didn't come. She looked at the cleared coordinates on the navigation display, the empty point in space with a 2-kilometer buffer around it, and said nothing else. But she didn't go far from the display either. Nobody did as the 6 hours counted down. The jump signature appeared at 5 hours and 51 minutes. Reth had seen hundreds of vessels come out of jump space. It had a characteristic look regardless of the ship. The fold in space, the brief distortion, the vessel emerging from it and stabilizing into normal space. The size of the distortion told you roughly what to expect before the ship was fully visible. Large distortion meant large vessel. Standard. This distortion was large. Very large. Which meant a large vessel, which meant a significant deployment, which was reassuring in a general sense. Reth watched the display and waited for the ship to resolve into a visible contact. One ship. Just one. Black hull, no markings visible at this range, no identification broadcast on any frequency. It came out of jump and settled into position at the coordinates with a steadiness that suggested either very good piloting or automated positioning or both. It sat there and did nothing for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. No communication. No signal. Nothing on any channel. Then the rear of the vessel opened. Reth leaned forward slightly. What came out didn't move the way ships moved. Didn't move the way anything moved that he had a reference for. 12 units, emerging one at a time from the rear of the black vessel, each one taking up position in open space with a kind of deliberate stillness that felt less like a military formation and more like something choosing where to stand. The Alliance sensor operator was running identification protocols. Reth could see the results in real time on the secondary display. The system was searching against every known classification in the Alliance's combined database. No match. No match. No match. 12 times. No match. Reth stared at the display. At the 12 things holding position in empty space around a black unmarked vessel that had not said a single word on any frequency since it arrived. His senior officer was standing very still beside him. "Colonel," she said quietly. Not a question. Just his name. The way you said someone's name when you needed them to confirm that you were both seeing the same thing. "I see them," Reth said. Nobody in the room said anything after that. They just watched. The first thing everyone noticed was the silence. Not the silence from the black ship, that had been there since the moment it dropped out of jump space and nobody had gotten used to it but everyone had learned to work around it. This was a different silence. It came from the front line. From the sensor feeds that ran continuously through Reth's command center, the ones that tracked Vorn movement across the entire engagement zone, the ones that for 8 months had shown the same relentless forward pressure that had become the background noise of every single day in this war. Those feeds went quiet. Reth's sensor operator noticed it first. She was young, competent, the kind of person who caught changes in data before anyone told her to look for them. She straightened in her seat and ran a quick check on the feed integrity because her first instinct was that something had malfunctioned. The feeds were fine. The network was fine. Every sensor in the grid was functioning exactly as it should. The Vorn had simply stopped moving. "Commander," she said. Her voice was level but tight underneath it. "Vorn advance has ceased. All units. Across the entire front." Reth looked at his display. Looked at the timestamps. Looked at the positions of the 12 units that had come out of the black ship 4 minutes ago and were currently holding position in open space approximately 60,000 kilometers from the nearest edge of the Vorn formation. 60,000 kilometers. The Vorn's own sensors would have picked them up at that range. Would have registered 12 contacts of unknown classification appearing in space between themselves and the Alliance forces. And the entire Vorn advance. Every unit across a front line that stretched across multiple engagement zones, a force that had not voluntarily stopped moving in 8 months, had gone still. All at once. Like a switch. Reth had studied the Vorn extensively since the war began. Everyone in Alliance command had. You studied your enemy the way you studied anything that was trying to end you, thoroughly, urgently, with the specific kind of focus that came from knowing the answer mattered. He knew their movement patterns, their formation structures, their response times, their tactical behaviors under different conditions. He had never read anything that described the Vorn stopping because of something they saw on a scanner. They didn't do that. It wasn't in their behavioral profile. They absorbed resistance and pushed through it. They registered threats and moved toward them. The idea of something appearing on a Vorn scanner and producing stillness rather than advance was not something any Alliance analyst had ever put in a report because there was no data to support it. There was data now. The 12 units began moving at the 6-minute mark. Slowly at first. The kind of slow that wasn't hesitation. More like the deliberate pace of something that understood it didn't need to hurry. They moved in a loose spread, no tight formation, no standard military arrangement. Just 12 things moving through open space in the direction of the Vorn front line with a quality of motion that Reth's display struggled to represent accurately. He had good sensors. Among the best in the Alliance fleet. They were giving him data that his brain kept trying to process through frameworks that didn't quite fit. The units were the right size for the readings, not enormous, not unusually large. But the way the sensor data rendered their movement had a quality to it that made his experienced eye keep questioning what it was seeing. Like the data was correct and his interpretation of it was the thing that needed adjusting. His senior officer had been standing at the display the whole time. She reached out and manually increased the sensor resolution without being asked. The image sharpened. She looked at it for a moment. Then she stepped back. Just one step. Small and automatic, the kind of movement the body made before the mind caught up with it. Reth looked at the enhanced display and understood why. On the Vorn side of the engagement zone, something was happening that no Alliance sensor was positioned to capture directly. What Reth had was the data, the positions, the movement readings, the outputs of a sensor network designed to track military hardware. What the data told him was that the Vorn units at the front of the formation were no longer holding their positions. They were moving backward. Not retreating in any organized military sense. Not pulling back to a secondary line or consolidating into a defensive formation. Moving backward the way individual units moved when the decision was being made at a level below strategy, below tactics, below anything that could be called a coordinated response. One unit at a time, then groups, then whole sections of the front line pressing back against the units behind them. 8 months. 8 months of a force that did not stop, did not yield, did not respond to anything the Alliance had put in front of it with anything except continued forward movement. 60,000 kilometers away, 12 things that had come out of a black unmarked ship that still hadn't said a word on any frequency were moving slowly toward that force. And the force was moving away from them. Reth watched the display for a long time without speaking. Around him his command crew was doing the same, each person at their station doing their job, running their checks, but all of them watching the same thing in their peripheral vision because none of them could fully look away from it. His sensor operator broke the silence first. Her voice was careful and precise and had something underneath it that she was doing a professional job of keeping out of her tone. "Commander," she said. "The Vorn front line is falling back across all sectors." Reth looked at the display. At 12 contacts moving slowly through space. At an 8-month advance coming apart in front of them like it had never been anything solid to begin with. "I see it," he said. He looked at the black ship sitting silent and still at the coordinates Earth had specified. Not a single transmission. Not a single signal on any frequency. Just sitting there the way it had been sitting since the moment it arrived, as if everything happening 60,000 kilometers away was completely expected and required no comment whatsoever. Reth thought about the 12 words Earth had sent back to him. Understood. Units already en route. Please clear the following coordinates. No ship count. No weapons list. No strategy breakdown. He was beginning to understand why. Rick Dale arrived at Reth's command ship 3 hours after the first engagement ended. He came alone. No aid. No security detail. No formal diplomatic escort of the kind that usually accompanied anyone moving between vessels during an active conflict. Just Rick, in a plain uniform with no decorations on it beyond his rank insignia, carrying a single folder that he set on the table when he sat down and didn't open once during the entire conversation. Reth had requested the meeting. Rick had agreed to it immediately, which Reth noted. No scheduling delay. No suggestion that a formal briefing through official channels might be more appropriate. Just, "Yes, I'll come." 3 hours. "Give me the coordinates." Reth had spent those 3 hours reading every engagement report his sensor team had been able to compile. There wasn't much in them that translated cleanly into standard military language. His analysts were experienced professionals who wrote precise reports and chose their words carefully. Several of them had added notes at the bottom of their sections that said, in different ways, that the standard reporting framework didn't fully capture what the data was showing and that they wanted that on record. Reth appreciated the honesty. It matched his own experience of looking at the display and feeling his existing understanding of things strain against what he was seeing. He had a lot of questions. Rick sat across the table from him and waited. He had the quality that Reth had noticed in certain humans. A complete comfort with silence that didn't read as coldness or disengagement. Just patience. The kind that didn't need to fill space with noise. Reth started with the most direct question because he had learned over 8 months that the most direct questions were the ones that saved the most time. "What are they?" he said. Rick looked at him steadily. "That's a question with a long answer and a short answer," he said. "Which do you want first?" "Short." "They're ours," Rick said. "Have been for a long time. We built the program, we run the program, we handle them. Everything about them is human in origin." Reth waited. "Long answer," Rick said, "is more complicated, but I'll give you what I can." The program had a formal designation. Rick mentioned it once, a long string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to Reth and apparently meant very little to anyone at Earth Command either, which was why nobody used it. Programs got formal designations because bureaucracies required them. What programs actually got called was a different thing entirely, shaped by the people who worked with them every day and developed their own language for what they were dealing with. The handlers called them wardens. Rick said the word plainly, the way he said everything. Reth ran it through his translation matrix and got two outputs simultaneously, which didn't happen often. The matrix was sophisticated enough to handle most language nuance. When it returned two simultaneous translations, it meant the word was doing more than one job at once. Guardian. And last resort. Reth looked at Rick. Those two things don't usually describe the same thing, he said. No, Rick agreed. That's kind of the point. Rick explained what he could in the same straightforward way he had explained everything else. Not reading from the folder. Not hedging with diplomatic language. Just talking, the way someone talked when they knew what they knew and saw no particular reason to dress it up. The Warden program had been running for a long time. Longer than Earth's membership in the Galactic Alliance. It had started from a different question entirely, not how do we build a better weapon, but what do we do when a weapon isn't enough? What do you reach for when you've used everything in the standard arsenal and the problem is still there? That question had driven a research and development program that ran for decades and produced something that didn't fit cleanly into any category that existed before it. Not machines, because machines didn't make the decisions the Wardens made in the field. Not soldiers in any traditional sense, because the relationship between a Warden and its handlers wasn't the relationship between a command structure and its units. Something in between. Something that had taken a very long time to develop into what Reth had watched on his sensor display 3 hours ago. 12 of them. That was what the deployment held. There were more. Rick didn't say how many more and Reth didn't ask, partly because the answer might be classified and partly because he wasn't sure he wanted a specific number sitting in his head. Why haven't we seen them before? Reth asked. In 60 years of Alliance membership, Earth has never deployed them in any conflict we know of. Rick nodded. Like this was a fair point that he had expected to come up. Because we haven't needed to, he said simply. Reth looked at him. In 60 years. In 60 years, Rick confirmed. Reth sat with that for a moment. Earth had been a member of the Galactic Alliance for 6 decades. In those 6 decades there had been 17 significant conflicts involving Alliance members. Earth had contributed forces to 9 of them. Standard forces. Ships, soldiers, the kind of deployment that showed up in official records and got written into shared military histories. Not once, in 60 years, had whatever was sitting in that black unmarked vessel been deemed necessary. Until now. The Vorn, Reth said. Not a question exactly. The Vorn, Rick said. Reth looked at the engagement reports on the table in front of him. The numbers his analysts had compiled. 8 months of data on a force that had not stopped for anything the Alliance had put in front of it. 12 Wardens. 1 engagement. The Vorn front line had pulled back 40 kilometers in 3 hours. Across every sector simultaneously. A force that had not voluntarily moved backward once in 8 months. He thought about the sensor display. About the way his senior officer had taken that one small involuntary step back when the resolution increased. About the Vorn units pressing backward against each other at the front of the formation before any engagement had even begun. They knew, Reth said quietly. The Vorn. The moment they appeared on scanners. They knew what they were. Rick looked at him. Said nothing. But he didn't disagree either. What does that mean? Reth asked. Rick picked up his folder for the first time. Held it without opening it. It means the Vorn have either encountered Wardens before, he said carefully, or they have encountered something enough like them that the recognition was instinctive. He paused. We think it's the second one. Reth looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the engagement reports. He had more questions. He was aware of that. There were things in what Rick had just said that opened doors to other questions that opened doors to more questions, and at the end of that corridor was probably information that would sit heavily in whoever was carrying it. He decided for now that he had enough. Will they hold? Reth asked. If the Vorn push back. Rick set the folder down. They'll hold, he said. The way someone said something when it wasn't a reassurance. When it was just a fact. Reth nodded once. Looked at the empty space on the table between them. Thank you for coming, he said. Rick stood. Picked up his folder. Thank you for asking for help, he said. Some situations call for it. He left the same way he had arrived. Alone. No escort. Unhurried. The door closed behind him and Reth sat in the quiet of his command room and looked at the engagement reports for a long time after that without reading them. The Vorn left Kelvari first. Not in the way military forces left contested space when they were making a tactical decision. There was nothing tactical about it. No organized withdrawal to a secondary position. No consolidation of remaining units into a defensible arrangement. No signal traffic that suggested orders being passed down through any kind of command structure. They simply began moving away from the system and kept moving until they were gone. The units at the front pulled back into the units behind them, and those units turned, and the whole mass of it moved outward like water running off a surface that had decided it didn't want to hold it anymore. Reth's sensor operator tracked it in real time and kept updating him every 30 minutes because the situation kept being more complete than the previous update had suggested. First the front line pulling back. Then the secondary formations. Then the support elements that the Alliance had spent months trying to locate and target and had never fully managed to pin down. All of it moving. All of it going. By the end of the third day, Calvari was clear. By the seventh day, the second system showed the same pattern beginning. The same absence of tactical logic. The same quality of movement that wasn't strategy and wasn't panic and wasn't anything that fit cleanly into the military vocabulary Reth had spent his career building. Just leaving. Completely and without apparent intention to return. 11 days after the Wardens deployed, all 4 systems were clear. Reth wrote the official report himself. He always wrote his own reports. Some commanders delegated that work, but Reth had never trusted summaries built by other people when the primary record was something he had witnessed directly. Words chosen by other people carried other people's framings, and in official records framings mattered as much as facts. He wanted his framing. The one that matched what he had actually seen. He wrote for 6 hours. The report covered the full timeline, the 8-month advance, the Alliance response efforts, the request to Earth, the deployment, the engagements, the withdrawal. It was thorough and precise and documented everything that his sensor data and his analysts' reports could support with evidence. When he finished, he sent it to the Alliance Records Office for formal filing. 40 minutes later, his communication terminal signaled an incoming message from Earth Command. Polite in tone. Brief in length. It noted that sections 4, 7, and 11 of the report contained information that Earth was formally requesting be classified at the highest Alliance security level pending a review of disclosure protocols. Sections 4, 7, and 11 covered the Wardens. Their behavior in the field. The specific sensor readings that his analysts had been unable to categorize. The detail about the Vorn response beginning before any engagement. The stillness that had come over the entire advance the moment 12 things appeared on their scanners 60,000 kilometers away. Reth read the message. Then he looked at the 3 sections in question. Then he filed the classification request without pushing back because he understood why it was being made and because he had already decided that some of what he had seen over the past 11 days was information he would carry quietly rather than loudly. He confirmed the classification. Sent back a single-line acknowledgement. Then he closed the report and sat for a while in the quiet of his command room. Rick Dale was back on Earth by the time the 4th system cleared. He got the confirmation at his desk at 0600 and read it the way he read most significant pieces of information. Quietly, completely, without immediate reaction. Then he set it down and looked out the window for a while at the early morning and thought about the math of what had just happened. 11 days. For systems. Not a single Alliance vessel lost in the process. The Wardens were back in the black ship which had left the coordinates as quietly as it had arrived, folding back into jump space without any communication on any frequency, the same silence on departure as on arrival. Rick had checked in with the program's senior handler, a woman named Dr. Judy Nash who had been running the program longer than Rick had been at Earth Command and who communicated in the same plain efficient language that good scientists used when they were comfortable with what they knew. She had told him the units were intact. All 12. No significant issues. Reintegration proceeding on schedule. Rick had thanked her and she had said of course, and that had been the entire conversation because neither of them were people who used more words than the situation required. He thought about Reth. About the meeting in the command ship. About the questions Reth had asked and the ones he hadn't and the long look he had given the engagement reports at the end. Reth was a good commander. The kind that processed things honestly rather than fitting them into whatever framework was most comfortable. Rick respected that. It was rarer than it should have been. He picked up his coffee. Looked at the confirmation again. For systems. 11 days. Reth's private notes were not filed anywhere. He kept them in a personal document on a device that wasn't connected to any official network. Not for secrecy exactly, more because some things he wrote were for himself and not for records. Thoughts that were still in process. Observations that hadn't fully settled into conclusions yet. The kind of writing you did when you needed to understand what you were thinking more than you needed anyone else to read it. He had been adding to the document throughout the 11 days. Small entries. Observations from the sensor data. Thoughts about the Vorn withdrawal and what it meant for the systems they had left behind and what kind of recovery effort those systems would need. Practical things mostly. The final entry was different. He wrote it on the evening of the 11th day after the last system cleared and the engagement feeds went quiet and the Alliance began the slow process of figuring out what came next. He sat in his command room with the lights low and the document open and thought for a while before he typed anything. Then he wrote what was true. 8 months of losing ground to a force that didn't stop for anything. An alliance that had tried everything in its combined arsenal and found the edges of what it was capable of. A request sent to the quiet member. The one nobody had ever really thought about too hard. 12 words back. 12 units out of a black ship. 11 days. He thought about the Vorn front line going still. All of it. All at once. The moment those 12 things appeared on their scanners. A force that had communicated exclusively through forward movement for 8 months, communicating something entirely different without a single signal being broadcast. Something that looked, if you watched the sensor data carefully enough, a lot like recognition. He thought about what Rick had said. That the Vorn had either encountered wardens before or had encountered something enough like them that the recognition was instinctive. Said carefully. Chosen words. The kind of careful choosing that meant there was more underneath it that wasn't being said. He thought about 60 years of Alliance membership. 17 conflicts. Earth contributing standard forces to 9 of them. Not once in 6 decades deploying what was sitting in that black ship. Not because it didn't exist. Because it hadn't been necessary. Until now. He typed the last line slowly. Read it back once. Then he closed the document and looked at the dark window of his command room and the stars beyond it and sat with the particular quiet of someone who had been through something significant and come out the other side and needed a moment before moving on to whatever came next. Outside the window, the recovered systems were already beginning the long work of rebuilding. Alliance vessels moving back into positions they had abandoned months ago. Supply lines re-establishing. The ordinary machinery of civilization restarting in spaces that had been taken and now were not. Reth watched it for a while. Then he picked up his work and got back to it. Because wars didn't end cleanly and recovery didn't happen by itself and there was always more to do. That was true regardless of what had just happened. Regardless of black ships and 12 units and a force that had left 4 systems in 11 days without anyone fully understanding what it had seen that made it decide to go. The galaxy kept moving. And somewhere in it, a black unmarked vessel was making its way back to wherever Earth kept the things it hoped it would never need to use again.